James, can you elaborate on the difference between the minimal dose for health and the optimal dose for performance?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, with relation to this study specifically, the fit20 study, we looked at strength, and strength is incredibly important for health and quality of life because it's associated with function and ability to perform tasks of daily living. Um, but strength also has a very a high skill element to it when you practice a specific task. And so, for example, this is why something we also talk about in the study is powerlifters, and we compare the data to a set of data of powerlifters who specifically train. For the skill of performing the power lifts, which involve a lot of strength, but also involve a skill element as well. So they involve a kind of performance element to them. And what might be optimal to develop general strength and the associated health and quality of life that's linked to that is substantially lower than what might be needed to maybe eke out the smallest kind of possible improvements in specific performance. And that gets even, the contrast becomes even more stark when you think about getting into more complicated sports and areas of performance. Powerlifting is a very discrete, closed skill that's quite easy to kind of to quantify. But when you get into things like team sports and stuff like that, there's huge aspects of performance that have to be trained in very, very different ways. And in fact, it's interesting actually because although typically the approach of kind of using a more minimal a dose, a more time efficient dose, has focused on the public health end of the spectrum in terms of general health and well-being of the general public engaging in these behaviors. There's actually a growing interest from the sports performance side of things as well, in using these types of approaches, because they're well aware that you don't create elite athletes just in the gym. They have to practice the skills of their sport, and the tactics involved with their sport, and all of the other things associated with it. And so, if they can produce, the greatest possible improvements in the gym, in the through resistance training with the minimal time commitment, that gives them more time to be able to actually practice the specific skills associated with their performance specifically. And so, yeah, there's actually a growing interest in the sports science and sports performance community at looking at this minimal dose. One of my PhD students is actually looking at this as his PhD, and looking at what's the least that powerlifters specifically in his case can do and still get those improvements in performance. So yeah, so although when you narrow it down to a specific aspect of performance, it may differ, and actually there may be a slightly greater dose that you need to use to try and optimize that. But generally, the general improvements that you get from resistance training, the improvements in strength that transfer to things like reductions in injury risk and improvements in function, that benefit both general population and sporting populations as a whole, can be achieved with a very minimal dose for both populations.
Yeah. So in this case, the minimal dose is almost like the optimal dose, at least for health and its benefits.
Exactly, and I think the optimal dose is a good way to look at it when you think about it holistically, and because it, there's always going to be some aspect that something is not going to be optimized for. It's difficult to optimize for everything, but certainly in this respect, what people want from engaging in resistance training is the more general adaptations: strength, function, reduce injury risk, increase muscle mass, and the metabolic health associated with that. From the performance perspective, particularly kind of increased muscle mass, increased strength, reduced injury risk. And all of these things can be produced with a small dose of a high quality stimulus, which is minimal in terms of the amount, but is optimal because it allows people to have time to engage in all of the other activities. It's time efficient, so it's optimal in that respect, that you can get pretty much what you're going to get out of it with small time commitment.
Very clear answer, James. Such a good message. Thanks.